everyone. In this video, I want to discuss the reasons why blocking is nowhere near as effective as most martial artists wrongly assume it is within a self-defense context. What we often see when martial artists teach self-defense is the most common way that self-defense is taught throughout the martial arts world, and it's hugely problematic, is what they have is they have the person launching an attack, you then block that attack, and then you launch your own counter-attack. You know, the reaction is beating the action. It doesn't really work out that way, and I'll explain the reasons why in a moment. First thing we need to look at is the different types of combative initiative. So in Japanese martial arts, we have this concept of sen. There is three types of sen. Go no sen, sen, and sen no sen. Go no sen is the one we've already talked about. Enemy launches an attack, you stop that attack, and then you launch your own counter-attack. You attack after they did. Then you've got sen. They launch an attack, and you simultaneously launch your own counter-attack. Right? So you're attacking as they attack. And then you've got sen. Sen no sen is you attack on their preparation to attack. Preemption, you know, and it doesn't take a mind reader to know when a criminal's about to get physical, right? You just need to know the ways that criminals operate and a little bit about human nature as well and our physiology. It doesn't take a mind reader to know that if you've got someone who's in your personal space or trying to get into your personal space despite you making clear you don't want them to, they're aggressive, shouting, pointing, or maybe they're going the other way. Maybe they're being charming and persistent, and either way they're giving you the creeps, but they're not backing off when you tell them to do. At that point, it should be clear that this person has bad intentions. So what we would then do at that point is go, right, I will launch my attack and then I will escape. The legalities of this are a question for another day. But in the UK, and most of the places I've visited actually, in the law, and obviously you need to check the law where you live, but the idea is that you are judged on what you honestly believe. Certainly in the UK, that's how it works. You are judged on what you honestly believe the situation to be. And again, it's quite easy to say, I honestly believe this person was going to attack me. You know, that they weren't backing off. They were making me feel extremely uncomfortable. They were getting more and more agitated and persistent. And therefore, I launched my own attack, not to kind of set them up to beat them up with another 30, but I launched my own attack to cause confusion and disorientation. And then I escaped, which is how preemption is practiced. For the karateka watching this, and obviously I'm a karateka, so I would imagine that's a lot of you. Sometimes people think, oh, but preemption goes against karate ni senten ashi. There is no first attack in karate, which would seem to be an endorsement of go no sen. You know, they attack and I counterattack. Not the case. If you look at what the old master said about this idea, karate ni senten ashi, there is no first attack in karate. All of them that wrote on it, you know, Funakoshi, Motobu, Mabuni, and so on, all of them that wrote on it, were clear that is a moral instruction, not a tactical instruction. So the idea is you are not the cause of violence. Again, the three I've just mentioned, Funakoshi, Mabuni, Motobu, were all clear that you must seize the initiative and attack first. And in that moment of confusion, surprise, then you escape. How to do preemption is a topic for another video. On this one, I want to focus on why blocking isn't that effective. If your self-defense training is based upon they act and then I react, you're going to have problems. Now, what I want to break down now for you is the reasons why people from their training think that blocking and countering will work so well in criminal violence when it doesn't. So there's a number of them I want to break through. There are others, but these would seem to be the key ones. So let's look at the first reason why martial artists wrongly assume that blocking and countering is going to work well within self-defense. So what tends to happen in the martial arts world is that they assume that their experience is a universal experience. What they experience applies to everything and everyone. So in the dojo, when they're training, or when they're training for various forms of consensual violence, you know, when two martial artists agree to square off, they train in that specific way and say, okay, self-defense is the same as this. They ignore the fact that self-defense and consensual violence have a very different dynamic. The criminal will try and overwhelm you with violence. They will explode and start swinging shots. They will be getting about 4 or 5 shots off a second. If you're lucky enough to block the first one, the next 3 will hit you. There are ways in which we can deal with those blitzes, but that's not blocking. Right? So one of the reasons why martial artists think blocking works well is that the person attacks too slowly. So when they're training in the dojo, they'll go blitz. And it's understandable, right? Because they're doing it for safety concerns. So what they'll do is they'll go, well, I don't really want to take his head off and have to be a little bit careful. So they'll come like this. And because of that, people go, duh, 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 and they block all three. Well, the reason for that is they have the time to do it. So that the reaction, their brain can process what's going on, as opposed to that real explosive blitz. Most criminal violence is way faster than most martial artists assume it's going to be. And that's particularly true if they're basing it on the way they train in the dojo, that the person attacks too slowly. Related to that is the idea of they always work off single attacks. So the person throws a technique and then just stands there while you do your thing. Of course, criminals don't do that. They blitz. They try and overwhelm you with violence. But when you're doing that blitz, if they come in slowly, then yes, you can go block, block, block. Right? But that's not the way it's going to work in the real world. If you are getting blitzed, default actions are the way to go. Cover your head and to crash it. You see a lot of these in the start of various katas, right? Where it kind of defends and wedges itself in. Then once you're in there, takes control of the enemy in some way, then hits him, and then you escape, right? It's Motobu said, you know, the true blocks of karate make it very difficult for the opponent to launch a second attack, right? Because it's not really blocking as such. It's crashing in and taking control if you're getting overwhelmed. Ideally, you don't want to be in a situation where you're getting overwhelmed, because there's a risk one of those punches will get through, which is why preemption is the most effective option when it comes to self-defense. So that's the first reason why people think blocking works, is their partners in the dojo are attacking too slowly. And again, I get it. I get that why you might want to do that, especially if they're relatively inexperienced students. You do that for safety. But to then say that's an accurate depiction when we've added in that safety component, and then say, oh yeah, but they'll attack this slowly in the real world, they won't. And that's the first reason why blocking doesn't work as well as people think it's going to. So the next problem we have in training, which leads people to think that criminal violence is the same as training, is known or predictable techniques. So if we look at known ones first, that's when you and the person you're practicing with say, okay, you attack me with this and I'll defend it. Of course that works because you know what's coming. In the real world, you don't know what's coming. Now, nothing wrong with that, of course. As a former trainer, that's fine. If you want to work a specific technique, certainly in the consensual violence world, when we're sparring each other, the guy throws a roundhouse. He's a way in which you can deal with a roundhouse. So throw a few roundhouses at each other and practice it. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a perfectly legitimate way to train. The problem arises when they go, oh, it will be I will have that foresight when it comes to criminal violence. You won't know what the technique's going to be. They're just going to wail on you really, really quick. So specific techniques that require specific reactions are normally the realm of consensual violence, which is when we spar with each other. Right? Because you've got the time and distance to react. When two martial artists spar or fight, they've often got a bit of a distance between them. So therefore, that gives you the space, and the space gives you the time. So in that scenario, yeah, by all means, you know, like I'm going to throw a cross at you or a gaku at you, and here's the defense I want you to work. But of course, in the real world, you've got to be able to work out what it is that's coming at you. Now, you can do that when martial artists fight each other, and that leads me to my next one, is because the techniques are often predictable. When martial artists fight with each other, they're almost always fighting with someone of the same discipline as them. Therefore, they are very good at reading what it is the other person is doing, because they've seen loads of this. So I do it at seminars quite a lot. You know, I'll stand in front of them and, you know, imagine we were sparring, consensual sparring, two martial artists trying out fight, and then they see that. They see the shoulder go, and they see the hand go, and then the earliest part of the movement, they go, oh yeah, it's a straight reverse punch. I recognise it coming. You know, they just say, oh, what's this? Oh, the elbow lifted a bit, the shoulder, that's a hook. I recognise it straight away. They can see it, and because they're far apart, much further apart than they would be in self-defense, that will give them the time to react to it. Compare that with criminal violence, when the guy's going to be at arm's length and he's going to be swinging at you at an incredibly violent, incredibly fast rate. If you're lucky enough to get your blocking out of the one before you launch your counterattack, he'll have hit you with the next three. You know, it's just not the way that it works. But I get that people go into the dojo and they either practice against known techniques or they spar with each other and they go, oh, blocking and countering works just fine. I make it work every single week. You know, I block and counter all the time in the dojo. Why wouldn't that work in self-defense? It's because they're assuming that the dynamic of those kind of exchanges, when martial artists fight each other, is the same dynamic that they will get in criminal self-defense. They won't. It's not in the criminal's interest to put up his guard, stand up and kind of move around it. That's not what they're going to do. They'll use deception, dialogue, intimidation. They'll get to arm's length and then they'll try and overwhelm you with violence. And it's for that reason, because the technique is not known and it's not predictable, that trying to react to it is something of a fool's errand. So we alluded to this in the first one, too few attacks. That's another problem. So the person does something and you're able to react, and then you go, bang, bang, I got back in, right? If you're training that way, that person does a singular thing or two things, you may stop those. Criminals don't act that way. They don't act in like little short bursts. They just go. They just try and take your head off, and they'll keep trying to take your head off. When martial artists spar each other, it's quite common for, I move in, I move back out, we move around a little bit, we'll throw openings, I move back in, there's another exchange, we move back out. Look at any boxing bout, MMA bout, kickboxing bout, points karate tournament, that's the dynamic, right? People move in, do some stuff, back away again. That's not the same dynamic associated with criminal violence. They don't do that. They don't throw a 1-2 and back off. They go and go and go and go and go, right? So the idea that, you know, you're going to be able to block all 4 of those that will hit you in like just over a second, you're not going to be able to. It's at the limits of human reaction speed. So that's another big reason people in the dojo train with too few attacks, and therefore they assume, well, I block those 2. Why can't I block 50? You can't. Because you've been lucky to block the first 2 in self-defense, you know what I mean? You've been riding your luck already. You were lucky to block the first one. And there'll be too few. The criminals keep coming and coming and coming and coming. Now, obviously, if you're able to kind of disrupt the flow of that in some way, that's great. But the idea of, you know, I block and then I counter is not really going to work. There are better ways to disrupt the flow, as we already talked about. You know, the kind of crashing in, taking control of the limbs, start creating openings, impact, 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 and then escaping. That's the way to go if you haven't been able to preempt. Overwhelm them with your violence. This natural kind of pulsing back and forth that martial artists get all the time when they fight each other, quite rightly. It's the way we do it in my dojo when we're talking about consensual violence. It's a smart thing to do in that scenario. But it's a very different context to criminal violence. It doesn't work the same way. So the idea that, you know, criminals are going to launch a couple of attacks and then back off, they don't. They launch lots and lots and lots, which makes it statistically harder and harder and harder to block those, especially with the rate of fire they'll be coming at you. Lots of them coming at you very, very quickly. And the final one I discussed, which we've kind of already touched on, is they're too far away. So what happens is, you know, the person launches their attack, and because you've got the space, you've got the time to react to it. And the increased time allows the blocking to work. That's why blocking and countering works pretty well when we fight each other. But in criminal violence, it's a close range affair. You know, the criminal doesn't start like 10 feet away from you, put the guard up and get ready to go. That's not how they work. They'll ambush you perhaps, or use deception, dialogue, you know, excuse me, mate, I've been walking my dog, I can't find my dog. You know, have you seen a dog anywhere? They'll get close and then they'll attack you from there. Or they'll try and intimidate. They'll get extremely aggressive in the hope of making you freeze. Or they'll be, you know, synthetically charming, you know, to try and get you to drop your mental guard. They'll get closer towards you, you know, they'll try and befriend you, and then they'll kind of launch whatever attack is they're trying to launch. But it makes no sense for them to let them know of their intentions when they're still way away from you. They don't do that. You know, they're going to get themselves close and then they're going to go. So you haven't got the space, therefore you haven't got the room to react. So that's another reason why when martial artists train each other, they think, oh, blocking and countering works fine when we train. Why wouldn't it work in self-defense? That's why. Those are the kind of key reasons why blocking and countering is nowhere near effective in self-defense as most people think. It's a very different dynamic. And if you're training one way and assuming that the dynamic will remain the same, you've got a problem there. So there's some of the reasons that may lead martial artists to wrongly conclude that blocking and countering is the go-to method for self-defense scenarios. Criminal does A, you respond with B, job done, right? That's not the way that it works for the reasons we've discussed. But fundamentally, the fundamental problem is they're not aware or don't want to be aware of the difference between the dynamic associated with consensual violence and non-consensual violence. So they spar each other in a certain way at a distance, and the blocking countering works just great. You think, well, that works, that will work for everywhere, in everything, against everyone. Those with experience of criminal violence and the speed and how close it is, how fast it is, how frantic it is, how chaotic it is, they'll tell you, yeah, trying to block and counter is not a great idea there. There are other things you can do, but trying to block, counter, forget about it. Martial artists without that experience then just go, oh no, block, counter, number one, that's top. When they attack, they leave themselves opening and you can attack this opening. Doesn't work. You may think it works because of the way you're training in the dojo. But, if somebody, a criminal explodes with that kind of extreme violence, tries to overwhelm them with that violence, the blocking, countering is not going to work. For self-defense, the main part of it is awareness and a healthy attitude to personal safety. Being aware of what criminal behavior does and what you can do in a non-life limiting way, but things you can do to make you less likely to be in those situations in the first place. And to recognize them when they're coming, so you can get out of them before it gets really bad. People, again, awareness, be aware. Well, how do I be aware? What do I need to be aware of? People don't do that. They just say, be aware. No, because if you can escape, you can escape. Preemption's part of that. I hit them and first, not to get the first of 20 shots off and then start kicking them in the head when they're on the ground. I do the first shot, with the aim of, boom, they're confused, they're disorientated, the shock, boom, that's my chance to get out of there. Escape, again, that's another thing. I say escape, a lot of martial arts here, running away. Running away is a physical act. Escape is a set of skills, techniques, tactics, strategies that you'll use to escape dangerous situations, that you need to be aware of, that you need to be educated in, and you need to practice. You need to practice escaping with other people around you, people that you're trying to protect. You need live drills for this kind of stuff. You can't just spar, in a consensual violence way and go, oh, the live skills I gained from that transpose over perfectly. They don't. They're great in and of themselves. I love all that stuff. Practice it myself, teach it myself, spend a lot of time on it. Probably, if I'm honest, probably spend more time on that than I do on the self-defense side of things nowadays in my own practice. But I'm still aware of what's what, and I want my students to be aware of what's what. They need to pull the right tool out of the bag, depending on the situation they're facing. This is what you'd use when you're fighting each other. This is what you're going to use for self-defense. It's different. And that's a problem, right? If all you have is a hammer, then every problem's a nail. So you do have martial artists that only have experience of one kind of violence and wrongly extrapolate that to all others. My partner threw a jab at me when we were sparring, and I blocked it and countered. Blocking and countering works. It did then. It will work then because you've got recognisable techniques, you've got recognisable distance, you generally get short little bursts of exchange, you don't get that close range overwhelming of violence. Recognisable techniques, as we've talked about. And then, of course, martial artists get wedded to their own ideas, and that's always a problem as well, right? So in some cases, it's like what I talked about then, that they think it works in one context and they don't understand that criminal violence has a very different dynamic. So they wrongly assume that it works. But they're passing it on with good intentions. They believe it works. They're not trying to deceive. Where I would suggest morally they're falling down is they haven't done their due diligence. So they're telling people this will work in this scenario because they haven't checked. They haven't talked to people who've been there. They haven't looked at how those situations actually play out. But in terms of them saying it works or not, they believe they're being truthful. Then you've got the other side of things as well, where people get very wedded to their ideas in martial arts. They get very tribal. They're very invested in something. So if you're one of those people who's practiced, as your self-defense training, block, counter, block, counter, block, counter, and you hear something like this, some will go, oh, maybe I need a rethink. Most won't. Most won't go away and look and see if what I'm saying is true. What most tend to do is go, no, I've got this solution already and it's perfect and I love it and it's fine and I'm invested in it. So then what will happen is when evidence comes the other way, they just no, I have the solution, let me change the problem. Let me pretend criminal violence is different to what it is. Of course, the logical way to do it is the other way around. You go, what's the problem? Then I need a solution to that problem as it is. And that's the wonderful thing about doing that is it's liberating. As a martial artist, it's liberating. You go, right, I don't need everything to fit into the self-defense box. Self-defense is not the gold standard by which all of martial arts should be judged. That wouldn't work in the street, so that's useless. You know, there's loads of things that I do that I know wouldn't work in self-defense. They're not for that. You know, fancy throws that I've learned, takedowns, various holds, fancy striking combinations, fancy strikes, you know, that I use all the time in the dojo, and they work well there when we're sparring against each other. You know, they're fun to do. Teach my students to do all that stuff too. You know, how am I going to close the gap? How am I going to deceive? How am I going to use their training against them? How am I going to do something really unexpected? But then when it comes to the self-defense side of things, it's different. Close range, very fast, very dynamic. So blocking and countering shouldn't be here. Shouldn't be the thing you start with. It's something that may work once if you get really lucky. There's other way more effective things that you need to be practicing. Blocking and countering does not work well in the self-defense situation because of the nature of that dynamic. And if you doubt that, I would suggest, you know, go away and study the dynamic, the true dynamic, with an open mind. Study the true dynamic of how self-defense really plays out. And when you've done that, it will be liberating to you. It's not a negative experience at all. It's great. All this stuff I've already got, all this blocking, countering, I know where it sits. And I can do it, and I can love it for what it is and where it works. And this other stuff, I've got that stuff too, should the worst happen and I ever need it. But yeah, I hope you found the video thought-provoking. And I would suggest, you know, go away, look at it for yourself, honestly. Look at it for yourself, because most martial artists do get this wrong. They start with blocking and countering. They regard it as the go-to method. And it's not. It's really problematic if your self-defense is based on the idea, I will stop their attack and then launch one of my own.